The Kalahari sun doesn't shine. It scorches. The heat curls across every inch of skin. And the air is so dry that every breath burns. Michael, a seasoned veterinarian known for his wildlife rescue missions, was on an anti-poaching patrol in the arid southern region of Botswana. Accompanied by a local guide named Tiboga. They weren't expecting anything unusual. Just another routine check, a day of sand, dust, and fading animal tracks. Until Tiboga stopped walking. "There's something not right," he whispered, pointing toward a dry waterhole, where the ground had cracked like ancient scars of time. As they approached, Michael at first thought he was looking at a corpse. A male lion, or rather, what remained of one, lay motionless under the searing sun. Skin clung tightly to bone, each rib stark beneath a coat of mangy, matted fur. The lion's once golden mane had turned grayish-brown, streaked with dust and dried blood. It was too weak to roar, too exhausted to die. Michael knelt beside it, heart heavy. He had seen many cases of abandoned, hunted, or injured animals, but what lay before him now was the final edge of life itself. He reached out to check for breath. It was so faint he had to wait several seconds just to feel the whisper of it, softer than the wind. And then, the lion opened its eyes. Not in rage, not in fear. It looked straight at Michael, deep, still, like a silent question. "Are you going to leave me too?" Michael froze. In all his years, he had seen the pleading eyes of abandoned dogs, the terrified eyes of monkeys trapped in cages, the lost eyes of orphaned elephant calves. But never had a lion, the embodiment of power and wildness, looked at him with eyes so human. "Save me," those eyes said, not in sound, but in the fragile thread of life that remained. Tiboga asked quietly, "Should we call it in, for them to give it the release shot?" Michael didn't respond right away. He looked into those eyes, at the wounds, at the desert. Then, he did something that left Tiboga stunned. He opened his medical bag and whispered, "No, I'm not going to let him die here, alone." The sun had tilted westward. The Kalahari afternoon light didn't soften, it only changed hue, shifting from blazing white to molten gold, casting shadows from the cracks in the earth like dried-out roots. Michael was still kneeling beside the lion. Sweat ran down his spine, not because of the heat, but because of the weight of the choice pressing on his mind. He knew the truth. This lion, even if evacuated in time, had little to no chance of survival. Severe dehydration. The hind legs appeared completely paralyzed. Old wounds were infected. It hadn't eaten for nearly 3 weeks. Possible neurological damage. He recalled lessons from his medical training. If the animal can no longer survive on its own, let it go peacefully. Then Tiboga, the quiet, faithful guide, asked once more, his voice as light as the desert wind, "Michael, if you save it, would it just be prolonging its pain?" Michael didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a needle and IV fluids from his medical backpack. "I don't know if I can save him," he said, already locating the shriveled vein, his hands moving with practiced precision. "But if he still wants to live, then I have no right to deny him that chance." He worked like a machine, but his eyes were full of emotion. The IV fluid began to drip. The needle touched the lion's skin, and there was no growl. No resistance. Tao simply closed his eyes and released a faint sound, barely more than the breath of an exhausted kitten. Then, Michael placed a hand on his head. A gesture any expert would warn against. Dangerous. That's a wild animal's instinct zone. But Tao didn't bite, didn't flinch, didn't roar. He just breathed, as if that very touch was what he had waited for all along. Michael turned on his headlamp as the sun disappeared completely. He knew he couldn't leave. They were more than 200 kilometers from the nearest station, through dry terrain. No transport, and unstable satellite signal. He grabbed the radio and spoke through the static. "Tiboga, call the station. Prep the helicopter. I need an emergency evac for a severely injured male lion. He might not make it until morning without continued fluids." Tiboga hesitated, then nodded. He had seen Michael heal leopards, save antelopes from traps, even rescue a troop of monkeys from an infectious outbreak. But a nearly 200-kilogram male lion, paralyzed in the middle of the desert. No water, no food for 3 weeks. No one had ever tried. That night, Michael laid out a survival blanket beneath a low tree. rigged a windbreak from his coat and scraps of fabric. He sat next to Tao the entire night, hands gripping the IV bag, eyes monitoring every breath, every twitch, no matter how small, not as a doctor, not as a conservationist, but as a human being, face to face with a life that had quietly chosen not to give up. And he whispered, not clearly to Tao, or the night sky, or even himself, "If you're still here with me at dawn, then I promise, I won't leave you behind." The moon rose slowly on the horizon, round and cold like a pair of eyes watching everything unfold from above. Michael sat leaning against the tree trunk, the IV bag tied hastily to a low-hanging branch. Beside him, Tao lay still, unmoving, not making a sound except for that shallow, rapid breathing, soft as wind passing through a canyon wall. The Kalahari's temperature plummeted mercilessly after sunset, from a scorching 40 degrees Celsius during the day. The ground now felt like an orphaned stone in the desert, bitterly cold. Michael opened the back of the off-road vehicle. He pulled out 2 thermal blankets, an emergency medical kit, the last protein bars, and water. He didn't eat. He wasn't hungry. The only thing he wanted to preserve was warmth, for the lion slowly dying beside him. He laid a blanket over Tao. Its gaunt body no longer resembled a predator, but a soul lost in the desert. Too weak to scream, Michael bent low, shielding from the northern wind that stabbed cold sand into their faces like needles. He pressed his back against Tao, a living windbreak. And then, the impossible happened. Tao let out a faint sound. Not a threatening growl, not a cry of pain, but a sigh, low, uncertain, yet rhythmic, as if whispering thanks. Michael froze. He'd worked with cheetahs, hyenas, leopards. He'd heard many sounds in the wild. But never had a lion made a sound that felt like comfort. "Are you speaking to me, Tao?" Michael asked softly, placing a hand gently on the tangled mane. Tao didn't answer, but his eyes opened, slowly, and looked at him, not fiercely, not weakly, just calmly, as if between them, a language had formed, one that didn't need learning. Michael didn't sleep all night. He checked the IV every 30 minutes. He monitored the heartbeat, watched the breathing, and listened to soft sounds from a creature once meant to symbolize savagery. Once, around midnight, when he shifted slightly to add more medication, Tao moved. Michael startled, fearing a wild reflex. But no. Tao simply tilted his head, closer to where Michael had just been. Like a child reaching for warmth in the dark. Tiboga slept in the vehicle some distance away. The radio signal was too weak for updates. The whole world seemed to vanish. Just one man and one lion, together, holding onto something too fragile, too strange, and too precious to be named. Around 4 a.m., Michael checked his watch. Less than 2 hours until dawn. The wind had calmed, the sand stilled, the scent of blood, sweat, and medicine merged into a breath of life not yet surrendered. And as the first purple blush of dawn swept across the Kalahari sky, Michael looked over and saw Tao still there, still breathing, still watching. A new day, a new chance, a life not yet extinguished. The Kalahari sky blushed in shades of gray and violet. No one knows why dawn here always carries something between life and loss. Perhaps because it has witnessed too many silent departures, and far too few returns. Michael wiped his face with a damp cloth. He hadn't slept the night before. He didn't dare. Tao was still there, emaciated. Still, breathing as thin as mist. But, alive. A few minutes later, the sound of rotor blades shattered the silence. A helicopter. Tiboga ran toward the makeshift signal station they had set up the day before, finally. A strong enough transmission had gone through at 3 a.m., and now the rescue team from Mount Haven was approaching. Michael had only 10 minutes to prepare Tao for a flight unlike any he had ever dealt with. A nearly unconscious male lion weighing nearly 200 kilograms. Still mid-infusion. At risk of shock if exposed too suddenly to changes in pressure or temperature. He whispered into Tao's ear as he injected a light anesthetic. "I don't know if you understand, but now, we're going to fly." The lion didn't react, but when its eyes flickered one last time, Michael knew. It had heard. The flight began. Michael didn't take a seat. He knelt beside Tao, holding the IV bag in his hand, adjusting the flow, and continuously managing the oxygen mask, borrowed hastily from the medical team on board. The aircraft door remained slightly ajar to stabilize pressure. The air was dry. Wind hissed against their ears. But inside that narrow cabin, time seemed to stop. At one point, the pilot glanced over. "We've got 35 minutes left. If his condition worsens, we'll need a plan B." Michael didn't respond. He simply tightened his grip on Tao, as if he could feel the faintest pulse through sheer will. As the helicopter crossed the red hills of the northern plateau, the sun finally rose. Its light struck Tao's face. Michael shielded it with a cloth. But in that instant, Tao opened his eyes. Just for a second, just one look. But this time, it wasn't a plea for help. It was acceptance, trust. Emergency landing. The field hospital near Mount Haven was ready. Dr. Sarah Tilhagel's team, director of the largest veterinary hospital in southern Africa, stood by. But when they saw Michael step off the helicopter, carrying the limp body of a massive male lion still breathing faintly, the entire team froze. Sarah shook her head. "Michael, are you sure? A wild lion, paralyzed, organ failure. Even if we save it, it will never return to the wild." Michael looked down at Tao, then looked up, calm and clear. "I didn't save him to send him back to the wild. I saved him because he wasn't ready to die." Sarah exhaled deeply, then gave the order. "Prep operating room 3, oxygen, IV fluids, IV antibiotics, and alert neurology. We've got a miracle to attempt." And so, under that brilliant yet heavy morning sun, the true battle for Tao's life began. A battle not fought only with medicine, but with one man's belief, and a lion's eyes that never surrendered. Operating Room 3 at the Mount Haven Rescue Center glowed bright under surgical lights. There were no voices, only the beeping of a heart monitor, the clink of instruments, and the heavy breathing of time itself. Tao lay on the operating table, massive, motionless, and almost unrecognizable as the majestic king of the wild he once was. Now, just a broken body, but still holding on to life by the thinnest thread. Michael stood beside the table, not as lead surgeon, but as the only person Tao had ever trusted. He wore surgical scrubs, a mask covering most of his face, leaving only his eyes visible. Eyes that followed every breath, every movement of the lion fighting on the razor's edge between life and death. The surgery began. Dr. Sarah Tilhagel, a veterinary neurology specialist, performed the intricate procedure on the spinal column. The damage was severe. A fractured L3 vertebra. Spinal cord compression causing complete paralysis of the lower body. Signs of tissue necrosis had begun. One more delay, and it would have been irreversible. In that moment, the whole team understood. This wasn't just a surgery. It was a battle against time, against fate, against the impossible. 8 hours passed. Throughout it all, Michael never left the room. He said nothing, just stayed beside Tao, whispering the same words he had once used for injured hyenas. "Abandoned cheetahs. You're still here, aren't you? Don't give up. Please don't, Tao." And then, when the final stitches sealed the incision, when the ventilator still hummed with gentle rhythm, when the heart monitor still showed a pulsing line, a small miracle happened. Though still under anesthesia, Tao gently turned his head, by only a few millimeters, toward Michael. Sarah looked at Michael. "He feels you." Michael didn't answer, but his hand clenched the edge of the table, and his eyes filled with tears. Not because the surgery succeeded, not because Tao survived, but because in that moment, he wasn't just the one who saved Tao. He was the one Tao trusted most in this world. The special recovery room was redesigned in a single day. Unlike other wildlife treatment areas, Tao's room had its own name, Room 0 Inches, because no one knew what else to call it. Half clinic, half sanctuary. There, Michael placed his fold-out bed next to Tao's, never more than an arm's length away. He had refused to go home, refused a hotel. He simply said, "If he wakes up in the night and doesn't see me, he'll think he's been abandoned again." The first night after surgery, Tao remained unconscious. The ventilator pulsed gently with every breath. The IV kept its steady rhythm. Michael lay on his side, hand resting near the lion's mane, like a child afraid of losing something just found. And just as he feared, around 3 a.m., Tao stirred, not fully conscious, but his eyes opened, slow, clouded, full of confusion. He tensed. A hoarse moan escaping, pain. Disorientation. Michael woke immediately. He didn't touch him. He just spoke, softly. I'm here. You're not alone. Tao stopped thrashing. He looked. And, his breathing slowed. Amid machines, wires, and the hum of equipment, that gaze brought Michael back to exactly where he belonged. In the days that followed, something strange happened. Every time Michael stepped out of the room, even for a few minutes to eat or consult with doctors, Tao would let out a soft sound, like a lost kitten. Every time Michael returned, Tao would nuzzle into his hand, twitching his ears slightly, as if trying to hug. Nurse Jennifer, who had seen hundreds of recoveries, sighed and said, "He didn't just survive. He chose to live because of you." Day 11, the first breakthrough. During a routine exam, when Michael gently stroked from Tao's hip to his tail, Tao suddenly twitched his hind leg. Everyone froze. Sarah gasped. Wait, the nerves, they're responding? They tested a series of reflexes. The response was faint, but present. This is impossible with the kind of injury he had. Sarah whispered. Unless something beyond medicine is at work. Michael said nothing. He just stroked Tao's head and whispered, "You're coming back, aren't you? Not just to live, but because we're not done yet." Night 17. Tao slept. But this time, there were no whimpers, no labored breaths, only steady breathing, his body gently rising and falling like wind across open grass, without pain. Without fear. Michael sat in a chair, writing in his journal. I think he's beginning to forgive humanity. Even though the wounds were all inflicted by us. Morning of the 18th day. The early sunlight streamed through the recovery room's glass window, filtering through Tao's mane and forming a faint honey-colored halo. Michael was checking the lion's temperature and surgical wound when suddenly, his hand froze. A tail. A movement. Slow. Very slow. But real. He looked again to be sure. Tao's tail had just twitched. Only once, but it wasn't a spasm. Not a reflex. It was intentional. He looked toward Tao. The lion was still half asleep. Eyes barely open, but they were no longer clouded like before. He was listening, sensing something new within himself. Michael immediately called Sarah. She arrived with the neural reflex device and asked Michael to hold Tao steady while she conducted the test. A small electrode gently touched his hind leg. No one expected anything. They had tried this 14 days earlier, and nothing had happened. But this time, Tao's back foot retracted. Sarah stood frozen. Michael, this is impossible. With a grade 4 spinal cord injury, he shouldn't have any voluntary motor response. But, he just did. Michael didn't respond. He simply bowed his head. Because deep down, he had never believed Tao was just a patient. Tao was a warrior. The days that followed, neural awakening. Day 20. Tao lightly flexed his right leg as Michael massaged his hip. Day 22. A toe moved. Day 24. Both hind legs trembled when Michael called his name. The medical team documented the entire process. A nearly 60-page report was submitted to the University of Veterinary Medicine in Pretoria. Preliminary conclusion. There is no medical explanation for this recovery trajectory. But Michael understood. He didn't need an MRI or data points. He simply looked into Tao's eyes each morning. The eyes of one who had crossed the threshold of death, and chose to return. A moment no one would forget. Day 25. During a physical therapy session, Michael supported Tao's abdomen with a sling harness. Suddenly, Tao stood on his own for 2 seconds. Then collapsed. But he didn't panic. He looked at Michael, and tried again. That moment was captured on a surveillance camera. Only 12 seconds. But the footage became a symbol of hope for the entire conservation world. Millions watched. Thousands of letters poured in. One message stood out. I just lost my father to a terminal illness. But when I saw Tao stand, I began to believe that no pain is meaningless. Ella S., New York. And Michael, the only one who wasn't surprised, simply told the reporters. He doesn't just want to live. He's teaching us how to rise. Early morning, day 32 after the surgery. The air in the recovery room was so still. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Michael opened the door gently. As always, he was used to checking Tao's heart rate, hind leg reflexes, and muscle condition each morning. But today, he saw something different in Tao's eyes. The lion wasn't lying there half asleep like usual. He was looking straight at Michael, alert, focused, waiting. Michael set down the saline bag. You want to try, don't you? Today is the first day? Tao began to lift himself. Very slowly, extremely slowly, but not from pain, from caution, from intention. Michael immediately strapped the rear support harness around Tao, a device designed to assist the hindquarters by reducing weight on the weakened legs. Two nurses stepped forward, gently stabilizing key pressure points. And then, the first step, Tao pushed forward with his front legs. 1, 2, his hind leg curled inward. And then, the left paw pressed into the ground, bearing his own weight. The room went dead silent. Sarah, who had always harbored doubts, gripped her clipboard so tightly her fingers turned white. Tao paused. Michael knelt, placing a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "It's okay, take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Tao pushed forward again. This time, the right paw followed. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't smooth, but it was the second step. Then the third, then the fourth. The room erupted. Nurse Jennifer burst into tears. Sarah murmured to herself, as if in disbelief, "There's no textbook for this. Only heart." Michael didn't cry. He simply walked beside Tao, step by step, just like he had in his darkest dreams, the ones where he feared he would never see this lion stand again. But now, he was walking beside him, and for himself. The world watched. A 28-second clip capturing Tao's 8 unsteady steps beside Michael was uploaded to social media with the caption, "Not everyone who rises is human. Some wild hearts are more grateful than we are." Within 48 hours, the video had 30 million views. BBC, National Geographic, The Guardian, and even UNICEF reposted it with a shared message. If Tao can stand, so can we. That night, Michael lay beside Tao, as he had every night, but this time, instead of whispering encouragement, he simply said 3 words. "So proud of you." Tao didn't reply. He just let out a warm, rasping purr, deeper than a house cat's, older than the savannah itself. Like a thank you carried from an ancient time. Morning of the 40th day after surgery. Michael stood before the large iron gate behind the rehabilitation wing. This wasn't the entrance to an enclosure. It was the door leading to the semi-wild reserve. A place meant for animals who could no longer return to the deep wild. But who were no longer patients, either. And today, Tao would step into that space. No more IV drips. No more harnesses. Just Michael beside him, a hand resting lightly on the lion's shoulder. And an open field of sunlight waiting ahead. Sarah, Jennifer, and the veterinary team stood at a distance, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The air felt sacred. Michael whispered, "Ready?" Tao didn't answer with a roar. He just stepped forward. 1 step, then 2. The gate opened. Wind rushed in, and Tao, for the first time in over 2 months, smelled real grass. Instinctive memory stirred. Tao stopped on the dirt, lowered his nose to the earth, then lifted his head and inhaled deeply. In his eyes, Michael saw a shift, from wild instinct to present awareness. Tao stretched forward, and roared, not loud, not threatening, just a deep, resonant sound, like an ancient bell awakening something buried within himself. The entire team held their breath. A creature once paralyzed, once declared, "Will never walk again," was now striding into the light. Michael no longer walked beside him. He stopped, let Tao walk on his own. Tao headed straight toward the grassy hill. Still limping, still slow, but the path was his. No one holding him up. No more pain in the way. And then, Tao did something that left everyone silent. He turned his head, looked directly at Michael, not like an animal watching a trainer, but like a friend, extending an invitation. Michael stepped forward. 2 steps, 3. Tao didn't move away. They walked together. No leash, no cage, no barriers, just sunlight, and wind, and the sacred stillness of a bond that had surpassed all biological boundaries. When the sun reached its height, Tao lay down in the middle of the grass, breathing softly, eyes half closed. Michael sat a few meters away. No need for words. Because today, he had witnessed the true result of believing in the impossible. Not just a lion walking again, but a wild soul returned to where it truly belongs. 3 days after Tao stepped out of the recovery room, Michael began to notice something strange. Every morning, Tao didn't lie in the grass like the other animals. He waited, not for food, not for the vet nurse, but for Michael. When Michael stepped out of the greenhouse wing, Tao stood up, stretched his shoulders, and gave a low growl, as if to say, "Follow me," an invitation from the wild. That morning, Michael decided to follow. No leash, no GPS, no cameras, just him, a small backpack, and Tao, silently moving through the semi-wild forest, ears always tuned to the steps behind him. They walked for over an hour, crossed 3 low hills, and followed a dry streambed. Then, Tao stopped. Before them lay a shallow, dry basin, rough rocks, dusty ground, nothing outwardly remarkable. But Michael recognized it. He froze. "This is where I found him for the first time." Tao slowly stepped to the edge of the rocky patch, sniffed a spot on the ground, the very place where his body once lay. Motionless, desperate, nearly surrendered, he lay down, not from exhaustion, but as if to mark the place. Michael was speechless. The lion remembered. And then, something even stranger happened. Tao didn't stay long. He stood, turned in a new direction, toward an overgrown path. Untouched, thick with brush. He looked back at Michael. Growled softly. Waiting. The guide. Michael followed. A feeling rose inside him, one he couldn't name. Instinct, a calling, or perhaps, a mission. Tao led him another 2 kilometers. Eventually, they reached a damp hollow, where 3 lionesses and 2 cubs lay beneath a small tree. Michael held his breath. He recognized one of them, a lioness he'd tracked through hidden cameras months ago. This group lived in isolation, avoiding humans, nearly vanished from the reserve. Tao approached the pride. No roaring, no dominance, just slow steps, placing himself between them and Michael. As a bridge, the lioness stared at Michael. At first, cautious. But then, no retreat. No alarm. Michael stepped closer, breathing as if in a dream. He understood. Tao had brought him here to help others, just as he had once been helped. The pride was hungry, dehydrated. There were no signs of recent hunts. Michael noted the coordinates, immediately returned to the station, reported to Sarah and the conservation team. Within 48 hours, a temporary water station was set up nearby. High-protein food was delivered. An emergency lion monitoring program was initiated. A sacred recurrence, Sarah said. Tao didn't just survive. He's using that life to give others a chance. Michael didn't respond. He simply looked into Tao's eyes that day, eyes that turned back toward him. Standing among lions, no longer a patient, no longer a victim, but a leader, a guide, a living witness to the most miraculous gift nature ever gave. Gratitude with memory. Since the day Tao led Michael to the pride of lionesses and cubs, everything changed. No one saw Tao as a medical recovery case anymore. No one called him an exception. People began calling him by a new name. The messenger of the wild. From living symbol to global inspiration. The footage of Tao leading Michael to save the pride was aired on BBC, National Geographic, CNN, and spread across digital platforms. One line from a journalist's voiceover left millions speechless. A lion left to die. Saved by a man, and then returned to save others. This is not just a story about animals. This is a story about humanity. Schools, ecological centers, and conservation organizations from over 20 countries reached out to Michael. They didn't want to see Tao. They wanted to learn from the relationship between Michael and Tao. To understand trust, loyalty, and the ability to connect beyond species. Michael, once a quiet conservationist, now became a storyteller. He began accepting invitations to speak at international conservation conferences, wildlife biology universities, youth education programs on the connection between humans and nature. At every talk, he brought only one photo. He and Tao, lying in the sun-drenched field, no leash, no cage, just 2 souls who chose to trust each other. Tao's first trip beyond the sanctuary. With special permission from the Botswana government, a model ecological zone was established for one purpose: to allow city children, those who had never seen a lion outside of a screen, to witness a real relationship between human and nature. Michael initially refused. He feared Tao would panic when taken away from his familiar grounds. But Tao didn't panic. When the transport vehicle arrived, he stepped down, silent, self-assured, and walked straight toward the open area where the children sat wide-eyed. No roar, no hesitation, just walking. Then he lay down, right in front of them. A 10-year-old boy stepped forward, trembling. Will he bite? Michael smiled. Only if you're not honest. Tao lifted his head, looked directly at the child, and then closed his eyes, as if offering an invitation. The boy placed his hand on Tao's mane. No one taught him how to touch, but the way he trembled with emotion made the entire schoolyard burst into tears. A recognized symbol. In September, Michael was honored by the United Nations Nature Conservation Organization with the Beyond Boundaries award. His acceptance speech was brief, only 36 words, but quoted everywhere. We saved a lion, but what he did after that was save the human part inside each of us. From a dying lion in the desert, Tao became a symbol of trust, rebirth, and the invisible thread connecting humanity to the wild souls we almost forgot how to listen to. 7 years had passed since the day Michael found Tao by the edge of a dry streambed in the heart of the desert. Back then, only death awaited, and yet today, inside a warm wooden cabin overlooking a field of wildflowers, Tao lay in his final sleep, beside the man he had never left. The final morning, Michael sat quietly in the armchair. One hand rested gently on Tao's mane. The other held an old notebook. Its first page bore the words, "The day I chose not to give up." Tao lay on a thick rug by the window, where the morning light filtered through the curtains. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were still open, still watching. No strength left to stand. No more roars to give. Only peace. Sarah stepped into the room, silently checking on him. She said nothing, only placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder, then left. She knew this farewell belonged to two souls, not meant to be witnessed. That moment came. At 10:42 a.m., Michael was rereading a journal entry about the day Tao took his first steps. He smiled softly, and then, Tao took one final, deep breath, and stopped. No sound, no panic, just a gentle exhale, like the flight of a bird across the sky. Michael didn't cry immediately. He leaned down, placed his hand on Tao's forehead. "I'm here," until the very last second. And when Tao's eyes closed, Michael saw something he would carry for the rest of his life. Not sorrow, but gratitude. One final gaze, full of thanks. A farewell to a free spirit. 3 days later, beneath the largest baobab tree in the sanctuary, Tao was laid to rest. No glass enclosures, no statues, just a small mound of earth, covered in wild grass and smooth stones. The headstone bore only one line. Tao, the lion who lived, who was grateful, and who reminded us who we are. People came from all over, not to mourn, but to honor. A young woman, once a patient battling depression, stood and said, "I kept living because I saw Tao rise. Today, I'm not here to say goodbye. I'm here to say thank you." Michael, the last to speak, said only 3 sentences. Tao was not a miracle. He was proof that miracles always exist, if we have the courage to believe. Michael returned to his small home by the forest. On the wall hung a single photo. He and Tao lying in a field of flowers. The lion's eyes gently closed. A human hand placed over his heart. He didn't call it a memory. He called it a witness. A witness that a lion could choose to forgive, to love, and to give back trust to a human. Time passed. Conservation projects bearing Tao's name continued to save hundreds of lives. His image was printed in textbooks across more than 30 countries. And every time Michael looked to the sky, he smiled, because he knew a pair of eyes were still watching. For some souls never disappear. They only change form, to remind us never to forget. Gratitude is the most sacred language of life.